Have you ever found that you've been playing a video game for a pretty long time and then suddenly you've realised that there was a feature or maybe a little trick or tip that you had completely missed that totally improves the game or makes a certain aspect of the game much easier, and then you feel like a bit of an idiot afterwards? Well, I guess you probably have, because I definitely have. And in this video I'm going to go over a bunch of things that No Man's Sky players hadn't realised after a certain number of hours. Some of these you might not actually know, and some of them are going to absolutely shock you, to be honest, especially the last one. I think it's absolutely outrageous that someone never figured it out. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and get stuck into the rest. First up is one I actually didn't really know about until fairly recently, which is probably kind of embarrassing. But if you happen to use the anomaly to warp anywhere, so the big warp that's in the back of it, whether that be one of your bases, one of the featured bases, your settlement, or whatever, you can actually warp right on back to the anomaly straight away using your quick menu. I mean, in hindsight, it seems pretty obvious that this would be a feature, but I only figured it out last year, as in 2023, not 2024, and I'm just glad I wasn't the only one who didn't know about it for a period of time. Next up is the first "how on earth did you not realise this was a thing" feature on this list. Basically, this one player has spent over 400 hours in No Man's Sky over the years before they realise that there are filters in photo mode. I mean, like, how do you not realise that there is literally a button on your screen to open them up so you can have a play around with them? Although I suppose if you've never used photo mode, then you can never know about this again. But this player has in fact been using photo mode, but just failed to realise that you can add a bunch of filters, alter the time of day, add or reduce weather effects like fog and cloud level, and so on. Next one, this one actually took me a fair long time to realise as well, but nowhere near as long as this player, who by the way took 400 hours to figure it out, is that you can resize your terrain manipulator when mining resources. But not only that, the different sizes yield different amounts of resources. So for example, if you have a bit of time on your hands, you can make the terrain manipulator smaller and gain yourself a lot more of whatever resources you're mining. And of course the flip side of that is if you happen to be in a rush and you make the terrain manipulator larger, you're going to save time, but you won't be getting as much of that resource. Let's move on into the galaxy map for this next one, and did you know you can give it a turbo mode? Yep. This one took this player 600 hours to figure out that if you use the sprint button, you'll be whizzing through the galaxy much quicker. It took me a little while to figure it out as well. I think I actually figured it out accidentally. But what took me even longer, perhaps more embarrassingly so, but not 600 hours mind you, is that you can filter the galaxy map by economy level, conflict level, and dominant life form. The option is even on the freaking screen as well, which makes it even more embarrassing, or annoying, whichever way you happen to look at it. Next up is Rerooting Power in your starship. Now, if you don't know this, I wouldn't feel too bad because it was only added in as part of the Echoes update, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, you can divert your ship's power to its weapons, its shields, or its engines. A bit like you can do in Starfield, but we won't talk about that game because it sucked. Anyway, this is really useful for those in space dogfights, or if you just want to move around quicker when exploring. And to do this, you need to hit up on the D-pad if you're on consoles, and if I'm not mistaken, the button on PC is a /. But someone on PC may need to verify that for me. Let's move on to crafting. Now, it took this player around about 200 hours before they realised that if they wanted to craft multiple of the same items, they don't actually need to craft each one individually, so one by one, but instead, you can increase the crafting amount and then craft, say, 5 in one go to save yourself a whole bunch of time. And of course, the amount you can craft at any given time will be limited by the amount of the resources you have to craft said component, but either way, it's a neat little trick when you want to craft a bunch of stuff, perhaps when base building because that involves a lot of crafting. And a little bonus tip for this one, if you want to craft something but you don't have the resources for it and you're not entirely sure what you need, then use the crafting tree, guys. I often see the crafting tree going under the radar and it makes figuring out how to craft complex resources really feckin' simple. Here's another one that I only figured out recently that was also mentioned in this Reddit thread by another player, but you can in fact zoom in on your analysis visor when you're scanning the surroundings. Now, the amount of times I got closer to the things I was trying to scan in the past when I just wanted to scan something that I couldn't quite see because it's too far away, when instead I could have just zoomed in, is ridiculous. It's a neat little tip for scanning or just getting a better view of something that's far away, basically. But one thing to note, I don't believe this works in VR, just in regular old non-VR gameplay. But as an aside now, I really need to try No Man's Sky in VR. I bet it looks freaking amazing. If you've ever used the Minotaur AI, you may enjoy this tip here. Basically, if you've got the AI enabled on that Minotaur, it is going to be following you around like a little lost puppy, and that's fine a lot of the time because it can be quite useful, but sometimes it can just get in the way or it can just be a little bit general pain in the ass. But this player figured out after a whole 300 hours that instead of just removing the AI technology, you can just disable it from the quick menu. Simples. Honestly guys, you should definitely spend some time going through what you can do with the quick menu in general. There are loads of little tips you can get from it, including things like finding trading outposts, drop pods, resource deposits, and a bunch of other stuff depending on whether you're on foot, in an exocraft, or in your starship. For me, this one was a bit like, how didn't you know that that was a thing? But basically, this one player had been playing No Man's Sky for over 100 hours before they realised that you can refine silica powder into glass. Yet, a simple yet effective one, especially if you're wanting to build a base with, well, windows or doors, or if you wanted to build an underwater base. Instead, this player was messing around finding frost crystals to refine into glass instead. I mean, how they knew about the frost crystals refining into glass and not the silicate powder after 100 hours beats me, but here we are. Freighters can play a large part of No Man's Sky for some players, but this little tip is half a nice to have kind of thing and a half a useful thing, and that is you can in fact spawn your freighter from when you're stood on a planet's surface. Now, not only does it look cool seeing it appear into the upper atmosphere, a bit like something out of Star Wars perhaps, but if you have the matter beam installed, you can then transfer cargo to and from it in case you need something from it or in case you're running out of exosuit inventory space. So yeah, kind of useful, also a nice thing to have. Nanites are harder to come by than units in No Man's Sky. Well, I mean, I say harder, more, you don't get as much as often, but this one player had spent 250 hours playing the game before realising that runaway mould refined into nanites. And to a larger extent, residual goop, viscous fluids, and living slime will all, eventually, also refine into nanites. So don't go discarding those resources because they're quite useful, now you well know, and instead lob them into your personal refiner when you're off exploring planets or doing whatever you, well, want to do. As a side note, larval cores are also a good resource to refine into nanites, assuming you don't need the units you can get from selling them. Let's talk about salvage glass. You know, the stuff you can get from destroying some sentinels, or the stuff you can occasionally get from autophage heads and crash sentinel interceptors on dissonant planets. Well, this stuff can be quite useful as shattering it is going to yield you a bunch of, well, useful things like this one player found out after playing the game for over 150 hours when they had previously just been discarding the stuff to free up inventory space. Some of the stuff you can get from shattering salvage glass include alloy, sentinel weapon shard, antimatter nanites, a couple of crafting components, and more. So don't make the mistake this player was doing and just discarding the stuff, and instead shatter it and you get some useful things. This is one where I don't know if it was a typo or not because this player had spent over 3,000 hours in the game. Yeah, that works out roughly 225 full days before realising that if you wave at NPCs, they might wave back. Who knew, eh? Because this is certainly a new one for me. But it's a cool little feature nonetheless. But to add to it, apparently, if you wave at NPCs who are flying over you when you're on a planet, they might just land so you can trade with them and possibly buy their ships and all that sort of stuff. It's important to note I haven't tested that, so feel free to give it a go, and if it does work, let us know in the comment section below. So, as I said, I've saved the funniest and definitely the most shocking one until the very end, and I'm pretty sure the game even tells you this, like, very early on. So I'm pretty damn shocked this player got so far into the game before realising it was a thing. And that thing is the pulse drive. Yep, that's right guys, the freaking pulse drive. Apparently they had spent around about 80 hours playing the game when they were flying to another planet, quite far away. They were just resting their controller on something whilst they went off and did something else for 20 minutes, like making tea, or being oblivious to literally everything else in life, whatever. I mean, like, how on earth do you spend 80 hours, 80 freaking hours before realising that the pulse drive in your starship is a thing? My word, man, I'm pretty sure it's even in the tutorial and everything. I mean, to be fair, most of those 80 hours must have been just spent flying between planets, but this one is definitely the winner for me. Now, if anyone was wondering where all of these came from, no, I didn't make them up. They all came from a Reddit thread on No Man's Sky page, and it makes for a great read and a good laugh in some cases, and occasionally you'll learn something new, just as I did, whilst going through it. So go ahead and check it out. But now that I've gone over that list of I spent X hours in No Man's Sky before I realised I didn't know about Z, which included some absolute shockers, what I want to know is, are there any features that you didn't realise after playing, I don't know, for say 100 or so hours or more? And if there are, let us know in the comments section below. And that's all for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something new, or if not, had a good laugh at other people who have fecked up. Anyway, if you're still here, it would be totally awesome if you could support my channel by hitting those like and subscribe buttons. You can now become a channel member as well, and as always, thank you for watching this video, and I hope to catch you in my next one.